Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. No, I'm just joking. We're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about Hershey's Kisses instead. Even though I will tell you, and the one thing that really, if I want to change one perception, is when people think about ethics, they think about, oh my gosh, it's training, or oh, it's dry. Ethics is the greatest human soap opera of the past 2,000 years. Lying, deceit, betrayal, honor, all of what makes us human is what gets into ethics. And that's why it really drives that forward. And so when I was thinking about it, I was thinking, what's my dream job? And, you know, I'm happy in it right now. Blogging about ethics is great. Maybe doing PR for Dungeons and Dragons would be awesome. But really, working for Hershey's Kisses would be pretty darn good. I mean, I think anybody would love working for Hershey's Kisses. It's chocolate. How can you not be happy? You know, when you think about what are the challenges they face. You know, one is obesity and eating too many Hershey's Kisses, particularly around Halloween, maybe contributes to that. Or is it possibly, you know, the competitors? You have to deal with a darn Reese's peanut butter cup every day. To more serious things, like what do you do with strikes in manufacturing and market shares and distribution and eroding margins, and those are the things we deal with. But when I think about the head of communications for Hershey's Kisses, I bet they never would have named, and I ask this of all my students and they never come up with it, one of their biggest ethical challenges they faced is Hershey's Kisses promotes child slavery. You know, and they walked in one day and that was what was going on. And let me be clear, Hershey's does not promote child slavery. But the challenge that they face is they source most of their cocoa and their chocolate from Africa, particularly Cote d'Ivoire and from Ghana. And when you look at it, they have two choices when they're working in those countries. They can work for the large multinationals where the money goes in, they run the cocoa farms, and it all gets sent back out of the country, out of Africa, back to the European headquarters. Or they can work with the family farms and get the money in those communities, which will help build schools, which will help build churches, infrastructure, wells, all the things that they need. But the problem is when working with those family farms, some of those family members will decide that, you know what, I can make more money having my 6-year-old, having my 8-year-old work on the farm than going to school. And so they're working on keeping them home. And so that gets to be a real issue. And I am simplifying a very complex issue. It's worth reading about. You know, Hershey's took a good stand and said that what they're going to do is source it and make sure they're working to eradicate child slavery and child labor on the farms, but they do want to invest in the community. So I think it's an interesting challenge, but it does tie into what I said, which is the supply chain. When I think about one of the top ethics challenges that a lot of businesses are facing, particularly around consumer expectations, is how ethically secure is your supply chain? Hershey was doing everything great, and suddenly there's exposés about how they're putting 6-year-olds to work 40 hours a week. And I'm finding businesses, particularly in healthcare, where I know a number of you work, the ethics of the supply chain is so essential. Think about it from Chipotle and what I like to call Carnitas Gate, when they were doing a good job, but some of their suppliers weren't ethically sourcing some of their pork and their feed, and how that came up to be an issue. You know, this is going to be a challenge. You're seeing consumers that value purpose so much are going to be looking at not just how is your company doing business, but how are the partners and the suppliers of your company doing business, and you're going to be held ethically accountable for their behavior. And, you know, I've used this as an example to start because I like Hershey's Kisses for a while. And I can just say, you know what? Remember when the supply chain was our biggest ethics challenge? Things have changed a whole heck of a lot over the past couple of months. You know, there was this minor thing called COVID-19, you know, racial injustice, systemic inequality, privacy, economy. We're all living at work now. I mean, I'm right now in my dining room living here 24/7. When I work, when I want a break, I commute to my other home office, which is my lounge chair in the living room. What are you going to ethically do if your CEO gets COVID? How do you need to announce it? Do you offer hazard pay to your workers? Plus other things like murder hornets, brain-eating amoebas, the frightening loss of civility and so much of our discourse, and what I'm seeing is the fracturing of our country. And we're not going to really get into politics today. There's enough other things going on that we don't really need to bring that up, but there will be a couple of examples I will share. And, you know, as I said, I mentioned to Teresa before we started, you know, all these are challenges over the past 6 months. But what's been going on in the past couple of weeks? And if you're really looking at it, look at what PR News is reporting about, that the disinformation, which we're talking about more today, is at an all-time high, and only a quarter of Americans believe that the social media platforms can do an accurate job removing false and misleading information. So we're seeing a rise in disinformation, but the filters aren't there. And as communicators, we're facing this giant challenge about how are we going to deal with a flood when it's disinformation about our companies. It's not all just about politics. It gets into the business world as well. And we're thinking about the Russians interfering with the elections, the Chinese interfering with the elections, whomever's interfering. We actually have, and this is one of the few political examples I'll give, there is a group that is in favor of President Trump that is paying about 24 teens in Arizona to do what people are saying the Russian bots and the Russian trolls are doing. Dealing with fraud, where they've got these people that are making posts advocating the conservative positions that they hold to try to influence the vote in Arizona. This has generated thousands of posts, 4,500 tweets with identical content. Now, I think there's a gray line here, and it's important to understand, because if you want to deal with influencers, we all deal with it all the time. If you want to have people that believe in your purpose, particularly in politics, nothing in itself inherently is wrong with that. The challenge was only one of about the 24 people here were disclosing they were being paid for what was going on. So I think there's going to probably be some FTC violations coming up here that you'll see in terms of fines. And again, it wasn't the Trump campaign involved, it was somebody else. But that just shows you these type of grassroots campaigns that are blending the ethics and kind of crossing over are not just found with foreign nationals acting against the U.S. interest. They're found people and advocates within the U.S., and it's not just limited to politics. You know, as a result of this fracturing of discourse, you know, think about this. A CBS News poll indicated only 21% of Americans want to take a vaccine when it comes out. We all are dreaming for it, but people are so skeptical. You know, I'm seeing that Texas is involved in a whole campaign around this. I know another state that we're working with at my agency is involved in trying to prime the pump to get people ready to take the vaccine when it comes, because it's a point where people aren't trusting something that's life-saving. And how do we ethically communicate around this in such a polarized issue? And when we're talking about it beyond politics, a great group, the Ethics and Compliance Initiative, puts out monthly stats. And they're showing that right now, 30% of people in America in business are finding pressure to bend the rules due to what's going on with COVID. And it's an interesting infographic that deals with why they're doing it. But it's really interesting. You're seeing a heightened expectation to bend the rules because of the pandemic. Because again, if you don't fudge your numbers, if you don't make an extra claim, are you going to suddenly be out of a job or putting other people out of a job? And so that's that pressure that people have internally. And how are we as communicators having to deal with that? We're dealing with PRSA had this post on the cancel culture environment, where if people disagree, they're getting shut out. How are you managing this on your message boards? How are you managing this when you have people that are in favor of your company, not in favor of your company, when employees are speaking up about things? When you're thinking about if you're a university trying to bring in a speaker, how do you determine who to bring in? These are all ethical considerations you're needing to bring in. But it goes beyond just those elements. Tarad Neptune has what I consider to be one of the best op-eds I have read in years in PR Week that talks about the racial inequality in PR. And that is not just a business imperative, that is an ethical imperative, that only 83%, we're still 83% Caucasian as an industry. And we need to do a better job there, and we need to actually walk the walk and not just talk the talk. And luckily, we're starting to see a lot of movement and discussion around it, but there's a lot of other elements and work that needs to be done. If you haven't watched this brilliant documentary, The Social Dilemma, on Netflix, it's something I encourage everybody to read. And it talks about the ethics of social media. And it looks at how are we engaging people, the engineering of consent, to go back to Edward Bernays. And using social psychology, using social science is totally fine and totally ethical. The challenge gets to be, are we doing it without people being aware of it? And do they have the ability to act as moral agents? And are they blurring some of those lines? But I've also been seeing pushback this week. It was in, I want to say, the Times of London and a few other places about criticizing this. It's basically what it's doing is it's showing a lot of the same old tropes that people have heard before that. Social media, and I've been doing tech PR for 25 plus years. You know, technology is mitigating us. And sorry for the noise. My son has a music class that's wrapping up. But technology is mitigating what we have going on. But there's so many other issues that tech is involved in, where tech is actually some of the unequal applications of technology are helping the haves get more and helping the disenfranchised, helping those that are at the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum feel even more pain. And this is eliminating some of their voices. You know, how do we make sure we really get a chance to fight that systemic injustice to level the playing field? And there's a lot of ethical issues as we're creating our content, as we're using social media. How do we drive that forward? This is a great example. I do go back to this one about a month with the White House and the FDA. And this is an example when if you do the ethically wrong thing, you get fired. In this case, Emily Miller was the agency's chief spokesperson. And after 11 days in the job, she was removed for making inflated claims and making sure she was kind of bending what was accurate. But what was also really interesting is the PR agency that advised the FDA, the senior person there, was fired, and they decided not to renew their contract. They said it was part of a regular review. I'll let you decide if you believe that or not, because he spoke the truth to power, and he said what we're doing here is unethical. And they didn't like it, and as a result, he was let go. Now, mind you, I'm sure there's other factors beyond it, but this just tells you that sometimes taking a stand for your ethics principles does have an outcome. But I will say, though, that firm that had their senior person laid off in this role, they're getting so much positive coverage about it, and I know they're going to get more business. So in the long term, it's going to benefit them of what's going on. You also have this one from the summer that I've got an interview coming up in a few weeks on Ethical Voices about it, about how the Pac-12 paid the Los Angeles Times $100,000 to get more coverage for their sport in it. It wasn't an advertorial. It wasn't pay for play. It was basically, we give you money and you write about us some more. And there's a lot of really interesting ethical gray areas around that as well. But when you look at all these things, and this is the question I get the most, you know, we have so many issues, from climate change to Black Lives Matter to politics. Do we engage? Do we not engage? And we'll be talking about this a lot more. And the answer to this, I believe, has changed fundamentally in the past few months. There's been a number of studies that came out, both in Forbes. There was a PR agency that did a study, and Edelman did their research. And I kind of liked Edelman's research that found out when they surveyed, it was in addition to their trust barometer. They did an extra survey about 3,000 consumers, where 52% of them said brands have to protect people to earn or keep their trust. And they also said that 71% of these respondents said companies that prioritize profits over people, that put shareholders and not stakeholders first, will lose their trust forever. Now, I'm a little bit skeptical over forever, because I think forever is a long time, and we can all think of brands that have done horrible things that come back. But it does show you, if you're trying to convince your senior executive about why do we need to do the ethical thing, here's two great data points. Another great data point from a study that was in the Forbes was showing that consumers are 4 times more likely to purchase from a brand with a purpose. If you have strong ethics as a foundation and a core, and you're putting purpose behind what you do, it's no longer a nice to have. It's a business imperative, particularly in B2C. But there's still a disconnect, and this data is a little bit old, but still relevant. USC Annenberg studied CEOs, and this happened back in 2019, but they found out 60% of CEOs aren't likely to engage. They don't want to get involved in the societal issues. You know, we as communicators know how important it is. We share these data points that drive it home. So the true answer is stay focused. When you're looking at what do you get involved in, there are so many causes. There are so many issues. We're in a fallen world that has a lot of issues that are going on. We're all human. Nobody is perfect. You can't just chase everything. And so what it comes down to, and the advice I give ethically, is find the causes that matter to your business, find the causes that matter to your employees, and take the ethical stance on those issues. This is a great pyramid from Southwest Airlines where they say, does it tie into our principles? You know, what's the impact on business, employees, customers, and the public? Who is creating the pressure? Is this something that there really is a groundswell for? Or is there only 1 or 2 voices screaming for something? You know, and can we afford to do it? It's better to do a few ethical causes right than to try to do 20 different things and run around like a 7-year-old soccer team where they're chasing after, ooh, here's the bright, shiny object, and you're not going to have that measurable impact. But as I said, when I look at some of the top issues, and we'll be addressing some guidance and some recommendations on these, we're in the disinformation age, and this is only going to get worse. And sometimes when people hear me talk, they end up leaving saying, Mark, you're so dystopian. And because I am very negative about some of the things that are going on, but I think the positive is there as well. We're all dealing with COVID and how that's impacting everything. We're dealing with anti-racism, the perceptions is systemic, the boycotts. We still have sexual harassments and assault. You know, faulty product service, protecting leadership, data collection and privacy are huge. The amount of information we have at our fingertips now when we are creating communications campaign is mind-boggling. And the question is, how do we ethically deal with it? But what really comes out, particularly in 2020, is words are not enough. We no longer can say the right thing. We actually need to do the right thing. And that's where the challenge happens, I think, with a lot of communicators, is that our CEOs come to us and say, you know what? We need to make a statement on Black Lives Matter. You know, we know that systemic racism is bad. And my first answer is no crap. It's 2020. You haven't realized that before. But it's not just enough to actually talk about it. You got to rip the Band-Aid off and you got to fix it. You know, same thing with anything in crisis communications. Yes, we can apologize, but are we going to fix the problem? And I think there's too much, I call it woke washing, similar to greenwashing, where there are businesses that are getting out there and just advocating and saying that Black Lives Matter. Again, yes, of course they do. But what are they really doing about it? Or same thing to Rod Neptune. That was the core of his frustration, is we have the data and we're not acting. But the problem gets to be sometimes, you know, I asked a few folks in Ethical Voices about this. And one of the interesting points that I think we often forget, because I'm like, we got to act, we can't just say, is this problem wasn't created overnight. This problem is not going to be fixed overnight. Even if you fix your employee and your hiring practices, that's going to take a while for you to increase the diversity of your company. If you're looking to add senior management that's more diverse, it's going to take a while to find those opportunities to hire them and integrate and have the change. So this is going to take time. And people that expect immediate results, we need to caution that this is a marathon. It's not a sprint. But also sometimes I'm seeing businesses are really getting into issues around this. It's new opportunities for old failures. The UK had a great case when people were using the stay-at-home hashtag to stay safe, stay at home. A lot of the big tobacco companies were buying and promoting and optimizing content around that to go and vape. Hey, you're at home, don't want to make the climate, you know, get smoke in your house, you can still vape. And there ended up being a huge ethical backlash around it. Somebody saw what hashtags were trending well, and they decided to do ad campaigns around them. And I think that's a case where actually it went a little bit too far, and you got to look at it. If you have something relevant, then we can say it, but we got to look at what are we doing really with that. And the same thing with Black Lives Matter. I mentioned woke washing being a key issue, but it's also so many brands were chiming onto it that the communications was being deluged. We had this conversation at my company about should we be talking about this, and what we decided is no. We're going to prove it with action. There are other voices that need to be heard rather than middle-aged Caucasian men from Seattle and Boston talking about these issues. And so we intentionally took a pause and let others move forward. And those are the kind of questions you need to ask yourself. Are you adding value to the conversation ethically, or are you going to distract it? Because if you aren't, you're increasingly going to be called out about it. You know, but in the end, as Jane mentioned, and it's one of the great things about PRSA, when you look at our members, we are the ethics voice. You know, and keeping in mind as we're the guardians and we are the advisors, we need to look at what our organization stands for, not necessarily the CEO or the board. I'm actually doing ethics training with a number of brands right now where we're working on what happens when you have some board members that are on the Blue Lives Matter side, some board members that are on the Black Lives Matter side, and you're managing to tick off half your customer base, if not all your customer base. And you need to really come up with a company position and make sure people understand whatever they are sharing, from their employees to their senior executives, is reflecting on the company. And you need to own your own lens in the world and own your past mistakes, but you need to be careful about going too far. I think Princeton has an interesting example right now I was reading about this week, where they did apologies for systemic racism, or they said they realized systemic racism is still alive at Princeton, and they are working to fix it, to which, according to this report, and I haven't confirmed it, but it's from a valid source, they've received notice that the Department of Justice may be investigating them for not following the Civil Rights Act of 1965, and they may just jeopardize millions of dollars in funding that they're receiving. So I need to always look at what are the impacts you can have from the statements that you make. If there's one thing I want you to take out from this, and right now where I am most concerned, is we are entering into the disinformation age. We are entering into an age that is as transformative of the rise of the internet was in the mid-90s. And people are talking about fake news. And we bring up all these fake news from teenagers in Macedonia. And this came from an Annenberg study over at USC, and Fred Cook and Golden did this. But the two kind of key takeaways here are, one, they found out that in 5 years, the average person isn't going to care whether paid, earned, shared, or owned media are clearly distinguishable. You know, we always talk about disclosure, but when you look at it, people are having an increasingly hard time identifying if it's true, if it's fake, if it's paid, if it's earned, all those different elements that they're really having there. And that gets to be a challenge. And I am personally worried about it when it comes to business. People look about things such as, you know, politics, but I think we need to look at it in terms of there are factories of fraud. And I've done a lot of anti-fraud PR for 25 years. So I've lived this area. There are factories of fraud in East Asia and Africa, even a little bit in the US, where they're working to do identity fraud. What happens when they realize they have the tools and they can pump out information to depress a company's stock price? You know, and you can suddenly, if you come out with fake news, make it look real, company loses a couple $1 billion and you're short selling that company, you've made a ton of money in a day. And how are we going to prepare ourselves to compete against this? The technology is out there. The AI is out there that could write 500 blog posts, the equivalent of a high school senior's level of writing on any topic, and spread it all over the internet. So I think we need to really make sure we're being aware of some of those issues. And when we're talking about privacy, GDPR is just the beginning. So, and I'm very sorry about the noise. So when you're looking at GDPR, you know, people right now are looking at privacy being more important than ever. But the question is, we can gather so much information. We all know that Alexa and the iPhone are listening to us, and that is helpful data. But how much do we use it? How do we use it? And how do we use it ethically? And that's one of the biggest elements. There's right now technology out there that will enable you, and I love this, when we talk about collecting and measuring the impact of PR, we look at things like sales, we look at conversion, we look at impressions, we look at tonality, we look at all those things. There's technology which will be going mainstream in the next couple of years, which fits on a regular pair of glasses that you're wearing, which can measure the dilation of your pupils and does it automatically. And it is an autonomic response that if somebody has to think about your content, your pupils dilate. You can't control it. So you can suddenly say, is your content causing people to think, or is it tough to understand? It also measures the level of moisture in your eye. So imagine if you're being able to gather this information, not just on the effectiveness of your ad, the dwell time, the click-throughs, but you know you're playing that Sarah McLachlan song on an ASPCA commercial, and 70% of the people that viewed it cried. You know, that is awesome, powerful data. But is it too much? And do we then start segmenting about what makes people cry and how to bring? And that's when you're really crossing the line, in my mind, from looking at effective data that people are willing to share to data that they're not aware they're sharing. And how do you really drive it forward? But you're going to see brands doing that. And by the way, I am not saying the ASPCA is doing that. I'm using that as an example just because that commercial absolutely like wrecks me every time I see it. But the GDPR is just the beginning. Any company that does business in California needs to comply with the California Consumer Privacy Act. Enforcement began as of July 20th, and we're starting to see people getting fined and sued for not dealing with it. But basically, it is dealing with consumers have to know what information you're collecting about them, why, and how you're sharing it. You know, you can tell companies to delete the data not share it and not sell it, and opt out of a company's terms of service without losing access to its offerings. And basically, if you're not doing this right now and you do any business in California, you've got issues that are going on and challenges that are happening. But what's going to make this really interesting is, at least with the GDPR, that covers all the European Union. California covers California. Massachusetts is looking at its own version. You're going to see Texas looking at their own version. You're going to see Colorado looking at their version overall as well. And so we're going to have, as communicators, not just dealing with one overarching one, but how do you deal with 50 ones? And realistically, most states are going to follow California. But I guarantee you there's some states like New York and Massachusetts, and in often cases Colorado, that take a slightly different skew. And we're going to need to look at how do we ethically deal with the data that our companies gathering, that our marketing teams, that our data scientists are taking in there. And we as communicators need to be asking, what kind of data are we gathering and what are we doing with it? You know, this is playing out across social media. TikTok is the greatest example. There was a study right now. TikTok yesterday announced they want to form a coalition to fight, to deal with both privacy and to fight all the abusive and inappropriate content that is out there. And you found out they've deleted about 104 million minutes of inappropriate video in the past 6 months. But how do you deal with it when people are creating that inappropriate video about you and about your clients? That really gets to be one of the key challenges that I think we're seeing, is privacy is getting to be an ethical issue. And I'll talk about it more in a few minutes, but how do we really make sure we do things appropriately when it comes to privacy? And you'd be saying, Mark, you know, you're being crazy. You're talking about all these things with big companies. We don't really deal with it that much. We're not really worrying about how much we're monitoring. We're not Facebook. We're not Google. We're not Uber. This example happened to Bayer, and it happened in Europe, and it happened to their PR agency. And basically, Bayer fired their PR agency, which was a multi-million-dollar contract, for doing stakeholder mapping, for basically understanding who's on what side of the issue, who's written about what. You know, which I think, frankly, if I asked anyone on this call, every one of us has done this. But the claim and the concern Bayer had, and it was brought to bear by somebody else in France, is that they were gathering this information in violation of the GDPR. And anybody who's involved in any sort of advocacy campaign, this is fundamentally bread and butter to what we do. And I don't have an answer to this right now. And personally, I believe there was probably some political motivation. They wanted to bring in another PR firm. They found a reason to get rid of him. But if you're looking at it, you're finding some people saying this type of information we're gathering, you better be able to ensure that it's been put in the public domain. People are aware of it. People have an opportunity to access it, and you're using it for relevant purposes. You know, Edelman did a great job using this for relevant purposes when they were working in Canada on an oil pipeline. Uber, when they were tracking reporters' movements and threatening to expose where they went, crossed the line overall. But this is something that is a risk, and we need to make sure we understand, you know, what type of information are we gathering and keeping on reporters? Because if it's too much and if it's stuff beyond their view, we may be putting ourselves at risk here. And it's an issue, there's no clear-cut answer, but it's something we need to pay attention to. And, you know, in addition to what I talk about with regards to technology and disinformation, deepfakes are going to be causing such an ethical nightmare for us. We can modify everything right now. And soon there's technology out there, you can see it, where I can put Jane's face on somebody else's body. And it will be so seamless, and it doesn't require a supercomputer. You know, this is going beyond just the filters on Snapchat, where you can insert people into images, and it looks real. Unless you have a deep computer forensics element, you're not going to be able to identify that. And eventually, they get so good, you may not ever be able to identify that. And you're saying, okay, Mark, you know, so what? What if you're an oil company? What if you're a pipeline company? What if you're a mining company and you have activists that don't like you? And they can use the technology to put your CEO in a compromising position. You know, they want to put your CEO at a Trump rally, at a strip bar, at wherever it is that's going on there. And you're going to have to react to that. And with the minute that video goes out there, it's going to go viral and spread. And this is why I got accused of being dystopian. This is going to be a giant challenge for us moving forward. And that you're seeing people really engaging this, and we need to be prepared for how do we do this. And the same thing on our ends, where we can mitigate video and manipulate it so well. You know, going beyond just photoshopping pictures, What are the ethics of really doing that? You saw people use that against presidential candidates by just artificially slowing down how fast they talk to make it sound like they're drunk when they weren't. This is going to become one of the biggest issues we face because people are going to stop believing what they see. Right now they know ads are photoshopped, but when they're looking at video, they believe the video is actually real, even though they know it may be edited. This is going to undermine the trust in seeing as believing. As communicators, in the next 5 to 10 years, we need to address that. And then there's the not so deep fakes, and I love this as an example. This is an influencer, it's a travel influencer with 305,000 followers, and somebody, and I'm just shocked how this person realized that in every single image and every single picture she was taking, she used the exact same clouds. Now, mind you, there's an app which will put this stuff in, and you're thinking, what's going on here? And I don't have the specific number, but having images with a semi-cloudy sky increases the click-throughs like 20 to 25%. I mean, there's some real data behind it. But again, people aren't going to start believing these images. They know they're staged. If you're involved in hospitality, if you're promoting people going to the Aspen ski resort, if you're going to Vail, if you're going to other places there, and people are going to start distrusting the images that's going on there, that's going to have an impact on what's happening there. And so this is an example. This is, I guarantee you, she is not a data scientist or a data manipulator, but she can use this to tweak it, to customize it, doesn't need to have any Photoshop knowledge, and people are losing their trust in seeing what's believing. And that gets to be a true ethical challenge that we face. Along with that is artificial intelligence. And artificial intelligence, some folks believe it's the machine overlords that will take our control. I personally believe machines already control our life. This already tells us when to get up in the morning. This is how we talk to people. This is how we communicate with folks. So we already have a lot of great AI control over what we're doing, but you're seeing so many businesses doing this. There was ethically a business that dealt with healthcare that was using AI and helping make informed patient decisions. But due to unplanned biases in their algorithms, they were giving African Americans less treatment, leading to more adverse events because of their AI. When you're going for credit, they're using AI in the decision-making process. How do you handle these things? And so you're seeing businesses being asked about unconscious bias in their AI development. And I guarantee you almost every company is looking to use AI. And I always hate when I go to webinars and people say, hey, here's these big issues, and then it's so what? What do you do about it? Well, I'm going to tell you, there are 10 questions you should be asking today about artificial intelligence. And when people are doing this or anything with your data scientists, A, why are we doing it? Did the people we're studying and the data we're using, did they give consent to the way the data is being used? And you'll be amazed at how many data scientists didn't do that. Were they given the option to opt out? Was it anonymized and cleaned of PII? Otherwise, you're at risk of data breaches and exposure. And people may think that, well, no, I'm only storing this in this system, and I've removed the names and everything else. Again, if you talk to Chris Penn, I interviewed for Ethical Voices about this, you give him 5 databases, he can build them together, and even if it's been cleansed at PII, they can find the connections and build a person and a profile overall. So you really need to make sure it truly is anonymized and cleansed, and we're truly getting the information we need. What are the biases the team was introducing? Every team has biases. We all do. How do we address it? Ask how we're doing the analysis. Ask people what are the shortcomings of the models. What aren't we considering, and who has access? How are we using this? And if you ask these questions, you're going to make sure that what people are doing with the data at your company is being done ethically and transparently. And one of the biggest failures we have, and Adam Ritchie and I have talked about this a lot, and so others, is PR people, just like we always break the law when it comes to speeding and jaywalking, we are horrible when it comes to the ethics of measurement. And it's not you, it's not me, it's everybody. Too many people inflate. There's no such thing as a 3x multiple. Too many people, when they're reporting results, A, they're still reporting on the FUD factor in terms of reach, but they don't divide. Yeah, we got a hit on Yahoo. Guess what? We reached 2 billion people. No, you didn't. There may be 2 billion UVMs to Yahoo, but A, you're only on Yahoo News, and you're only top of mind for 10 minutes. So let's at least do real reporting about what's going on there. We do apples and oranges comparisons. We know every article that's been written about our clients to get our share of voice. But we do a Google search or a Factiva search or a Trendkite or whatever else on the competitors, and we kind of compare them. You can't do that because then you're not really looking effectively at all the competitors. And so you're coming up with false equivalencies. And when somebody asks you about this, you're undercutting yourself in terms of what's going on. It's one of the worst conversations I have when I start doing it. I take over from another agency and we're actually dividing, or we're doing real metrics. And like, well, wait a minute, our numbers went down. And you just got to explain why you're ripping off the Band-Aid. You don't want to trash, especially if it's a VP of marketing that loves that data. You're suddenly telling them that the way they're measuring data is unethical. It's a tough conversation to have. And then frankly, the other big issue that a lot of us have is we believe the wire services, and it's not their fault, and they disclose it, and they are being ethical. But we all get the coverage reports in the wire services about how our article was seen by 672 news outlets and reached 24 million people. No, it didn't. It's on container pages at a bunch of sites that nobody ever visits, but it is accurate with the way they phrase it. And I've had conversations with both Business Wire and PR Newswire. I'm not slamming them. And basically, it's people buy based on that. So they kind of have to do it. But we know better to report that stuff. But too many businesses still report on wire pickups, which really aren't accurate. Really report on the earned coverage. Don't use, and I think don't make some of the ethical failings there, because when it gets to the C-level executives and they start digging into this data, you're undercutting yourself. So I know we started late and I've been going off on a couple of tangents, so I want to go to a few final points and thoughts to think about. One is, beyond just these issues, how do we hire ethical employees? Because your agency, your company, the ethics of your employees are what helps determine their culture and helps determine the value that you really have. And I'd say we need to change our interview questions. When we're PR pros, we always ask about news releases, and we ask about how people are pitching and what's your strategic counsel and what was the crisis you dealt with. Make gray ethics questions a part of every interview. Give them a scenario. We know we're going to have to do layoffs. In that your best friend with his pregnant wife just came in and they're talking about buying a house. What do you do? And they come and say, hey, is there any reason I shouldn't buy a house in the next, month? And you know that he's going to be laid off in 2 weeks. Those are the scenarios that can help understand the reasoning. Even if they don't give the answer you're looking for, what you want to find out is why are they thinking about it? Or give them situations that call for ethical decisions and see if they call out the ethical issues there. Patrice Tanaka, who is just one of the coolest people around, she told me in every interview, when she's interviewing for a new employee at a PR agency, she asked them, what is your purpose in life? And she's like, a third of the people just stare at me like a deer in the headlights, like, oh my God, I have never been asked that question in an interview and I can't believe it. And she quickly moves on. But the other ones, it's telling, because how people understand, are you self-centered? Are you family-centered? Are you company-centered? Are you society-centered? Really, what are you looking at doing and where do you want to have the impact? And she loves finding the people that are thinking big, because those are the folks that bring the true ethics to the organization. Asking your proudest accomplishment. Ask them, what is the most difficult ethical challenge you ever faced? You'll be amazed at the results there. And again, the challenge itself doesn't really matter. There's very few Horatio at the Gates moments. People like Paula Padine that were whistleblowers of the VA, thankfully, are few and far between. But we're on the road to perdition, where there's the death of 1,000 ethical cuts, where people, let's fudge numbers, or what do we do with timesheets, or all these other elements that people run into. Those are the little things that add up. And that's what we really need to understand. And hiring, though, is just the first step. Ethics training is like vitamins. You can't do it just during PRSA Ethics Month in September, or PRCA's Ethics Month in September, or the Global Alliance's Ethics Month in February. You need to do it all the time, year-round. It's still local. Gallup says 70% of employee engagement in ethics comes down to local team factors. That's what happened with Wells Fargo. They may have great policies up on the top, but when you get to individual offices and managers that are causing the pressure, that's where they started realizing having some other hiccups that are going on. I tell every agency, bring up ethics examples and communications with your clients. They're going to love it. If you're a client talking to an agency, ask them what ethics issues, see how they face, because you need to protect yourself and understand what's going on. Because really, in the end, when it comes to ethics, you need to train your ethical mind. Ethics needs to be honed like a golfer hones their swing. You need to be able to better execute under pressure. And this isn't just a great tagline I created or anything else there. It's people are 5 times more likely to make ethical decisions when they have time to think. It is hardwired into millions of years of evolution or biology. When you have to make a snap judgment, you go for what is going to make you the best, what's going to take care of you or take care of your family. It's only when you have a time to think about it that you can really think beyond self. And you can think about organizations. And it really deals with an Academy of Management study that shows that you can take a look at it. And what I'll say is there are very few things that are more controlled chaos than a PR professional's day. We don't have the time. You know, we always have time to hit the pause and take the 10-second break, as Michael Meath likes to say. But we need to make these decisions. And if you're thinking about it, when that fastball is coming down the plate, when John Elway is throwing the pass to one of the wide receivers, you know, they need to make that snap and that decision right away. And it's the same thing for us. And only by training it and by discussing these things can we really make the decisions ethically in real time. It's what I tell the students at BU and all the junior professionals I work with. You know, people like Jane and Mark and Teresa, we're not ethically smart and wise because we're inherently wise. We've been doing this for 25 years, and we've seen every single screw up and mistake made, and we've learned from them all. And what we can do by talking about it, by reading about it, is you can have this training so you don't make these mistakes. And that's why these webinars and these issues are so important. You know, as that 10,000 hour rule comes to hit, you know, we can train it, we can discuss it, make it a part of your communications meetings, have discussions with your staff and peers, involve the agencies and the client as I talked about. How do you do it? Highlight them a step. Ask people if they saw what they thought. If you were the manager, be quiet. Once I say, here's an unethical issue and here's something I saw, it takes a brave junior or mid-level staffer to say, Mark, you're full of crap. You need to make sure that you're very clear in terms of what's going on. Let everybody else talk. Don't give your opinion until the end. Let it flow freely. Have others bring examples. You know, I set aside in my team meetings at least once a month, we have ethics discussion where people bring up what's an interesting ethical issue of the week. This is an exercise that helps others think ethically. Understand that, you know what, ethics matters to you, and it might uncover issues you haven't considered. I do this with my students at BU, and I found issues, and I'm like, wow, I never even thought of this, or I never thought about it in this perspective. But let's talk about this further. And it's a really good way to get everybody thinking and on the same page. You know, it's important to identify the issue, define what's causing the concern, discuss it, make the call, and the key element here is revisit it. Too often, and when I look at a lot of the ethical models, and you can get a Shannon Bowen and Marlene Neal and all great ones that are out there, they lack the element of going back and once you made the decision. We think too often in PR, boom, we're done, we're on to the next thing. We need to give it a post-mortem. Did we make the right call? How could we have done better? What did we learn from it, particularly when it comes to ethical issues? Because that's how you can train the staff. That's how you can make it real. That's how you can make it stand out. You don't have to do it yourself. There's the PRSA Code of Ethics, the PAGE principles. Come and listen to my blog and podcast. You know the references. You don't need to memorize the code unless you're going for your APR exam, when you definitely need to. And understand that. Re-examine it. It makes it fresh again. You know, so in conclusion, one, be prepared for the barbecue. We're human. You're gonna screw up. None of us are perfect. Every single one of us has made some ethical lapse somewhere in our lives that we regret. That's okay. You know, it happens. It's that matter of how do you recover from it. Your organization's gonna screw something up. Some sales guy is gonna fudge numbers. Some data scientists are gonna go and play with things in a certain way. Data's gonna get exposed. Your CEO is gonna say something horrible and racist. Those things are gonna happen. It's how we recover from it that matters. In Ethisphere, which is an organization that does a great analysis of who are the most ethical companies, they pay, they do it, they get admitted, and they examine them, they kind of identify a few folks, and they have an annual conference on ethics. I was there last year, back when we actually had in-person conferences. There were 400 lawyers and me. I was like the only PR person in the room, which is fascinating. But their mantra, and it's true, is being an ethical company. Being an ethical practitioner doesn't mean you're perfect, because you're not. But it means when something happens, when you screw something up, you respond quickly and ethically. If you do that, people are going to forgive you. You're going to fix it, you're going to learn, and that's going to be okay, because the bottom line is our reputation as professionals, as an industry, and as the companies we serve is based on trust. Profits come from strong reputations. Strong reputations come from consistently making ethical decisions. Ethical decisions can and must be trained. And my favorite ethics quote probably of all time comes from Albert Einstein, where he says, relativity applies to physics, not ethics. It's only by really moving forward and doing this that we can drive it home. And so examine ethics every day, every week. There's so many stories out there. Go to my blog, go to other blogs. I don't care where you go. But if you can look at this, there's that broad spectrum of people. And that's why I started this, is I wanted people to be able to touch base with it. And I now do it twice a week. Every Monday is an interview. Every Thursday is a recap of some of the different PR ethics issues of the week. And hopefully that resource and hopefully that webinar have been useful to you. Thank you. I think we have a few minutes left for any questions that people may have.
Mark, thank you. Thank you. As always, high energy, incredibly funny, because I appreciate the humor that you put into it, but also thought-provoking. I liked the data backed by many of your examples. So I hope that is true for the rest of the group. There are some questions that did come up in the chat. So one of those is, what is the most difficult challenge that you have faced? And how did you work through it?
Oh, I haven't faced any ethics challenges. What are you talking about? I work for great ethical companies. No, I mean, it's a standard thing. I'll face so many, and people ask me that. And what I kind of think where I boil down to is where one of the challenges we had is we had some information we had received that would have absolutely cut the knees out of a competing firm or a competing company that we were representing the client there. And the way we got it was not intentionally deceptive, but we got access to information that we shouldn't have gotten. And the question is, do you make use of that information or not? And particularly because it was borderline illegal what some folks were doing there. So what's your ethical obligation to do that? And we kind of worked through it and looked at how we addressed that. And that was a very big ethics decision that you had to face there, is when you get that information, what do you do with it? Especially if you really know that it's something that could be hurting other people. But the way you got it is questionable. And that's one of the things we had to work through there.
We've all probably been faced with that one at some level and some intensity. Another question was, of all the people you've interviewed for your podcast, who gave you something really great that you took away regarding ethics? I know you have a couple of examples you shared with me.
Well, I think I'm on interview 89 right now. So I've talked to about 90 people. And they're like my kids, I love all of them. And I love all of them equally, except sometimes I love one of my kids more than I love some of my other kids. They're all good. They're all insightful. I mean, I joke about, as I said, I love when Patricia Tanaka talked about the ethics of interviewing questions, which I hadn't really thought of, and that was a good one. And, when I asked her for the best piece of ethics advice, if you look at it, the two most common responses are, do the New York Times test. Are you comfortable seeing this in the New York Times? If not, don't do it. And the other comment is tell the truth, are kind of like the two most, with the third being trust your gut. Those are the ones, probably out of the 80, 40 people have some variations on some of those. Two that I loved, Patrice Tanaka, when her example was share your cookies and toys, which again, I just loved because it was in a different way. And then Michelle Egan, who ends up doing PR for the pipelines up in Alaska, ended up saying, Mark, you can't polish a turd. That in the end, that was the advice that she was given. If something is a horrible ethical failure, you got to admit it and you got to move on. Don't try to fake it up there. Don't try to fake it. You're going to get into trouble. But there's so many that are really interesting and out there. I do a post about twice a year, kind of encapsulating all those maxims and advice that people can find, because so many of them speak to different scenarios.
That's awesome. Those are pretty visual, especially Michelle Egan. I have a question for you. It's an ethical quandary I think that many companies face, and you talked a little bit about the disconnect in your supply chain, and are they paying attention to what's happening around them while they're trying to get their work done? But recently, Bandimere, many of the Colorado people here will know Bandimere. They own the quarter-mile drag racing track here. They are sponsored by a local hospital, and they are very much opposed to masks and all that's happening with COVID, and have had several rallies to that effect, and not following public health guidelines and rules and that kind of thing. I looked at that as a real ethical issue, that if the hospital is sponsoring a track that goes against all of the patients that they're treating and all that, there's a real disconnect in their authenticity of that. So is that an ethical quandary, or is it just a business decision?
Yeah, I think it's a great point. And actually, there's a professor at Rutgers who wrote about not that case, but about that same issue about the ethics of sponsorships. Earlier this week, actually, it came out, Jane. It's going to be in my This Week in PR Ethics post tomorrow morning. So it's one of the ones I already highlighted, because that gets to be the issue, is the ethics of sponsorships. And, yes, companies should expect quid pro quo, but why are they doing it? Are they doing it for the right reasons, and are the brands that they are taking sponsorships for aligning with their needs and their issues? And that's something I think the hospital needs to look at, in terms of, it's a case, and you can look at it, and this is where I'm going to get a little bit geeky, but I'll keep it simple. There's really three schools of thought of ethics, right? There's deontology, which basically means the act in and of itself matters. There's utilitarianism, teleology, which deals with the consequence of the act. And there's virtue, which is kind of Plato, Aristotle, and Socrates. And so you could see a case where they could be saying that this sponsorship is helping more from a utilitarian point of view. It could make a lot of sense. But from a deontological point of view, or virtue-based approach, it doesn't. And you need to understand, as a communicator, what's the approach you're using and how are you measuring it. And what I'll just say is, you need to be consistent in whatever that framework is. That may lead you to different decisions, and that's where you get a lot of the ethical dilemmas and discussions. Jeff Bezos, the example I use and I love, was with around when he cut healthcare benefits for certain Walmart, for certain Amazon employees, right after he made the pledge as part of the business roundtable that we're going to take care of all stakeholders. And it's a fascinating one, because depending on what ethical approach you use, you could say he was being either ethical or he was being unethical. And you need to look at it. And I think this case, Jane, could fit in that quandary. And you need to really work it through yourself. And you need to make sure, what I'd say is, do your goals align? Why are you doing it? And is this something that you're applying the same way across the board and making your ethical decisions?
Yeah, it's interesting. It is 12:33, which means we're just a hair over. We started a hair late. I want to be respectful of people's time. So I'm going to give a quick wrap here of, don't forget the summit that is coming up, and the PRSA Colorado Awards, October 12th through 15, and then the Gold Pick Awards on the 16th. So make sure you mark your calendars for that. I want to say that I'm so grateful for you, Mark, for taking time out of your day to come to the Mountain Time Zone. I know you have family here. I know you love Bojo's Pizza almost as much as a good lobster.
Almost.
Almost.
Give me a mountain pizza any day.
And it's true mountain pizza when you put honey on the crust. But and so grateful for you to share your insight, and to share what you have learned from so many people that you have talked to, and to also continue to be a voice for all of us. I loved your recommendation that ethics should be looked at like vitamins. It should be taken every day, and
absolutely
part of our regular mantra. So for those of you who have joined us today, thank you so much. Thank you for being here and investing in yourself, for participating in Colorado's programming. I think we do an amazing job in bringing you an array of conversations that can hopefully take you back into your workplace, or whether you're counseling other organizations or businesses, and elevate not only what they are doing, but elevate the services and resources that we provide to them as counselors, whether that's internal or externally. So with that, have an amazing Wednesday. Enjoy fall. Embrace it with all its beautifulness here in Colorado. We usually get Indian summer now. Mark, I know you're heading into the cold zone, but and most importantly, everybody, please be safe and be healthy, and continue to, most importantly, be happy. Laugh often. Thanks.
Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.